Hey everyone, just a few quick things before we get started. Don't forget to sign the attendance sheet. It's just real simple. Just ask you 2 questions. Kind of looks like this. But that's pretty much it. Please enjoy. Hope you all learned something. Alright, hello everybody. Today we're going to be going over worksheet number 15. So it's on classes. And if you have any questions about this worksheet or the previous worksheet, feel free to stop by my office hours. Okay, so the first question we have is, what is a class? So a class is similar to a structure, but what classes do, it's another user-defined data type, but it also creates objects. So I guess we could say that a class is a user-defined data type similar to a struct, and it is used to create objects. And so create objects. Okay, and so what I mean by create an object is, remember how when we were working with structs, you had a defined struct, and then when you made a variable, the struct type, it was just a variable with a data type of whatever structure you created. Well, in classes, it works similarly, except when you create a variable with a class type, it's called an object. And since C++ is an object-oriented language, it has to deal with a lot of classes, so that's kind of where that ties in. It's kind of helpful to know the fact that it creates objects isn't necessarily it doesn't have any real impact on how you code this, besides like just following the general guidelines. But it's just helpful to know. Okay, so what are some main differences between classes and structs? Okay, so there's a couple main differences. One we just talked about is classes create objects while structs don't. Okay, another big one has to do with what's allowed inside a class versus inside a struct. Classes allow functions while structs don't. And then the last one is classes have what are called public and private variables, while structs don't. So it's just classes have more things in comparison to structs. And so maybe asking what a public and private variable is, and so that's actually my next question. So let's move on to that one. So within a class, there's 2 different type of variables. There's what's called a private variable, and these actually also apply to, they're actually members, because you can also have functions within public or private. So we'll put members here. Okay, well, so like I was saying, they consist of functions or variables, right? So private members are members that can't be accessed outside of the class. So what this means is, if you're trying to access a private member of a class, of an object created by a class, right? If you're trying to access a private member from main, you could not do this. And so this is kind of what public members are for. So public members are members that can be accessed outside main, outside of the class. So you use public members to access private members. For instance, if you had a public a private member called, like if you had a class of like a triangle, right? You had a private member called height, and then you could use a public member function, to like return the height. So like public members are allowed to access private members, but from main you can't access private members, but you can access public members from main. So put can't be accessed in main. Then I'll put can be accessed from main. And then I'm also going to put can access private variables or private members. Okay, and so that's the main difference. It may be a little confusing, but just remember private has like more security around it, right? While public is free for anyone to use. Okay, and so how do you declare a class? So declaring a class is very similar to declaring a structure. So you would just do you type class like you would, but in like with structures you type struct, but in class you type class, and then you would type the class name. And so obviously it's not going to be class name unless for some reason you have class called class name. But anyways, you'd put it to wherever you want the class name to be. Open brackets, right? And then you have your private members. So it's going to be private with a semicolon. And then like let's say you have an X, and a Y. And then you're going to have your public members. And let's just say like we have a function called get X and get Y. Okay, and then we have a closing bracket, and just like a struct, we also have a semicolon after a class. So this is very important. So classes also have semicolons after the closing brackets, just like structures. Okay, but that's how you declare a class. Class, the class name, then any private variables and public variables, and then closing semicolon. And this is also done outside of main. Okay, so what is a member function? So a member function is what we're talking about over here, right? It allows you to access private variables. So a member function is a public function within a class that allows you to access private variables within that class. Okay, so like an example was get X and get Y, and so what these might do is it might return X or return Y. You can also have member functions to set the length of X and Y, or like you can have the public functions change the variables in private, but you just have to use member functions in order to change or access private variables at all. So does the placement of public and private members matter? Like so up here, if we had put public before private, or if we had even put like a private public private sandwich or public private public sandwich, sounds a little weird, but you know what I mean. So like does that matter? And the answer is no. Just make sure each member is correctly in each section, I guess. Like don't put a public variable in a private don't put a public member in the private section, because then you won't be able to use it. Okay, And so the next question I have is fill in the blank to show that the member function will not change with any data in calling the object. Okay, so this one is kind of just like when you're working with variables as well. Remember how we have variables, we have like an x, and you can change x however you want, but then if we want a variable that won't change throughout the whole program, we do like constant x is equal to like 100. And so it's kind of the same theory, it's kind of the same thing with this one. So what you do is when you're declaring the function within main, I mean within your classes, yeah, when you're declaring the function within your public members within your class, you just gotta add const to it. And so this is saying, hey, you're only going to, in this case, it'd be like getting the width of whatever it is. You're only going to be returning the width. We are not going to change this at all. That way, even if you accidentally try to change it, it won't let you. Either by giving you an error or just not change it. I think it just gives you an error though. Okay. Okay, now how do you define a member function? So there are multiple ways to define member functions. You can either define them A, within the class itself, or B, outside of the class and outside of main. So like over here, these would be defined, oh, I forgot a semicolon here. These would be defined outside of, oh, I didn't even put like, oh my gosh, okay, sorry. You're supposed to put the data type. My bad, I just forgot. Anyways, since I didn't define these within the class, I define them outside main. If you have like a lot of different functions, it may just be easier to define them outside the class. It may just, if you have a lot of different functions, it may be easier to just define them all outside the class, or you can just define them straight within the class, which is probably easier. For instance, if we go back and we want to copy this, oops, okay, yeah, so if we want to define them within the function, all we need to do is treat it like you were defining it like a regular class, but just do it within the class. So, and then like return x, oops, words auto capitalization. Okay, return x, and thus you have a successfully defined function. Now, if you wanted to define it outside of the class, what you'd have to do is you'd have to do the data type, then the class name. So in this case, it's class name. You know, usually it wouldn't be. It'd be like the actual class name, not class name. Anyways, the data type, the class name, 2 colons, then the function name, then you define it. So return y in this case. Let me see if I can't put this all on the same page. Okay, and so this is how you define it within main, and then this is how you, within your class, and then this is how you define it outside of your class. So, oh no. Okay, so it's real simple to declare it within your class, but in case you need to declare it outside your class, or in case you want to, if you see it declared with something that Duncan wrote, it's just like declaring a normal function still, except right before the function name, you're going to want to put the class name and 2 colons. So it's still pretty easy. Okay. And then like if you wanted to get this const right, you just need to put const. But then you'd have to put it up here as well. But that's it. Okay, so my next question is, what is an accessor and what is a mutator? So these are kind of like another word for some of the functions within the classes itself. So an accessor is a member function that gets a value from a class member's variable but doesn't change it. So that gets a class variable but does not change it. Okay. And then I'm sure you can guess what a mutator is now. A mutator is a member function that does change, oh gosh, a class variable. So it's just like mutators, kind of like changing an accessor is just accessing. So it's just kind of a different way of saying, is it constant? Does it change something or does it not change something? And so, like, you'd use const with accessors, but you wouldn't use them with mutators, right? Because mutators do change things. Okay, so how do you declare something with a class type inside of main? And so, like I was saying earlier, it's going to be really similar to how we declare structures. So you would type the class name. So if we were going off of whatever, so we're going off those, we do class name, and then we would give the variable name itself. So we can call this one test, I guess, and then a semicolon. And so that's how you define an instance of the class, or declare something with that class type. And then you can go on and use test to do a bunch of things. And it says, so how do you access an object's members? So this is also just like structs. You just need to be wary of which ones are public and which ones are private. So going off the class name test, we can do something like test dot get x, right? Okay. And then so that would return the value of x. So it's just, you also use the dot operator. Like a struct. Okay. Alright, so can you have pointers to an object? And if so, how do you declare them? So remember what I was saying earlier about how classes create objects? So this is more like saying, can you have a pointer to test? Since test is considered an object. So so you really just were saying, can I have a pointer to test? And so if I'm asking you the question, the answer is probably yes. So yes, you can have pointers to an object. And how do you declare one? Okay, so it's going to be like you're declaring a regular pointer and like you're declaring the class, right? Because when you declare a regular pointer to an integer, you have to declare that it's like an int, right? So we'd also do it's just like a regular pointer in a sense, except it just has the class name in front of it instead of a predefined data type. And then the pointer, and then we'll just put class pointer, I guess. That's fine. And then that's how you would declare one. If you wanted to set it equal to something, right, you'd have to be like class pointer is equal to, and if you remember from my pointer video, we talked about how when you're setting pointers equal to variables, you have to set them equal to the address of the variable. So we'll set it equal to the address of test, because otherwise it won't work. But this is how you would set class pointer, declare a pointer for a class and then set it equal to a class object. You could also put in the same line to try to initialize it.